Do excuse the wet hair, I just had a shower, but I'm recording a devlog. So, welcome everybody back to this week's devlog. I did a little bit more this week, but not as much as I want to, because I never do as much as I want to. If I did as much as I wanted to, the game would be fucking finished by now. Let's get into it. First and foremost, let's just go into selected viewport. I will mute that so that you don't get any echoing. A very little thing, but I decided to change the double jump particles a bit. There's more of them, they're smaller, mostly because if you're double jumping at this angle, before it would fill your entire screen with like a lot of big particles. Now it no longer does that. Also, it just looks better, in my opinion. Because it still does the same thing functionally, but it's way less intrusive in literally every way possible. So it still is mostly a placeholder, admittedly, because I do want to have some like more heavy visual effects looking stuff. I know what I roughly wanted to look like. I wanted to look like more like an energy burst in the end. I don't know how I'm gonna make that yet. So let's move the frick on to something else here real quick, because I did a couple of things making levels. The first one is in the one-dimensional level for the computer world, which is this one. Is I added a lot of hanging particles with binary, so zeros and ones, in red, blue, and green. Sorry for the throat is not quite up to snuff. So if we walk through this, you'll see that the entire... Also, I think I hadn't changed a lot of the textures yet last week. So yeah, everything is now in... Everything that's going to have this binary texture does have it now, which is very, very good. The wireframe models are not made yet, so we'll get to that maybe this week, maybe next week, at least for the enemies, not for the character itself, because that's going to require a whole heap of other stuff. The actual like binary platforms, as you can see, they were see-through before. That ended up with way too many problems, because it looked messy. It didn't really like tell you where you could and couldn't stand most of the time. Things from the background were blending in too much. It was just generally a whole issue. So I decided to just go with black platforms with a binary code on it instead. And then I at first made a lot of like cubes with these textures that are just floating around in space. And while that looked somewhat cool, it also looked very like noisy and busy. And as it stands right now, this also looks relatively noisy. Maybe, I am not entirely sure on whether or not it's too noisy yet. I personally don't think so. I think that this actually looks pretty damn good, all things considered. I also just lost a checkpoint, so there is that, or died and got reset back to the checkpoint, rather. So a very long story short is that this is roughly going to be what this level looks like in the end. This level is almost complete, at least for as I have it right now. Obviously, it's going to undergo some changes as we go along and we get feedback from beta players. But I think having the zeros and ones really does add the thing that we missed. I also added a different particle system to the platforms here. And I added particle systems to the actual blocks, which you mostly see when they're moving. But this entire puzzle is now a lot more visually clear. I will probably remove the particle systems in front of, like between the camera and the actual maze here. I will stop playing, just because they might be a little bit too distracting, so that'll mostly be here in the background. But yeah, I quite like the look of this. So I also, for the time being, added the same particle systems to the 2D level, a lot less dense, as you can see. Eventually this is going to include not only zeros and ones, but 0 through 9, and then like A to H, like hexadecimal. Because this is a 2D, all the platforms are going to have a similar texture to the binary one, but with hexadecimal code. instead. So the particles are going to reflect that as well. I just need to make all of those textures and images real quick, which brings me to a very, very annoying thing that I actually figured out. And as you can see, going back into the one-dimensional textures here, there is some glitchiness and overlap with some of these textures. And that has everything to do with the fact that I'm using a PNG, which has a alpha. And just Unreal isn't about that for some reason. It supports it, but it just glitches the fuck out. And I had the same thing with these zeros and these ones. So what I ended up doing instead, which is just a useful tip if you're in a similar situation at any point in time, it's in textures, computer level, is I ended up making it into a just a JPEG with a black background and white, the white number. And then in the actual material, I just used that as the opacity mask. So, and then I set particle color, and the particle color itself, you can see in my particle system, is this one, I think. Yeah, so the particle color is a random from color array, red, green, or blue. It's just that easy. So that's how that works without it getting glitchy. That took me longer than I'm willing to admit to figure out. I'll tell you that much. So I might show you in editing how the other ID looked. It looks a lot more messy. And even so, there's probably going to be less particles in the final version, because I think this is just a little too much, maybe. I'm not entirely sure on that. So I made a couple of blueprints as well. So let's go into the test level here real quick. Where is it? Test level, hallway test. Save selected, that's fine. I also have a bit of a cold, so if my nose stuffs up, I will sound very bad. So I added a couple more things. I don't know if this thing over here existed yet last week. I don't think it did. So I'll show you. This is a platform that just stays where it is until you go into the hitbox, at which point it'll start moving. At the moment, it's still a tiny bit buggy in that I think, oh no, it doesn't teleport away anymore. Never mind, seems like I fixed that. Then I also made a platform that falls out from under you after a little bit of time. So, and they do eventually like rise back up, because otherwise you can get very, very fucked. The main reason I did that is because this is exactly the same functionality, more or less. Not exactly the same functionality due to the double jump mechanics. But more or less it's the same functionality as where the fuck am I? As these fuckers, right? Because if you just like play from here real quick, the whole idea here was that these are kind of like just floating platforms that disappear once you jump on them once. These do re-enable your double jump though, which those other ones don't do. The issue is because of the way I deal with the collectible for having defeated all the enemies in a level, I can't really respawn enemies after a certain amount of time. So an obstacle like this, you have to make on one go or you have to die, which means that if I do an obstacle like this to make it fair, I'm always going to need to put a checkpoint right in front of it. Or I need to make something like where the ghost of the enemy comes back and is intractable but doesn't do anything regarding the counter for the collectible or something. I don't exactly know. Maybe I'll just entirely do away with this ID as like a platform and enemy combined, and I'll just like put them somewhere as an enemy, which is a lot less appealing, obviously, because the entire thing is that this is an enemy that goes up and down, and you kind of want to have that either over a void as a platforming challenge, or you want to maybe have it somewhere where you can jump up onto the track and then double jump off of that to get to like a secret path that then enables you to get like a couple of wisps to get as the collectible for that. I could use it in that scenario, I suppose. So I also fixed the stomping enemy. These ones over here were a little buggy before, where they would clip through the floor if they weren't exactly just like their normal scale. That has been fixed. It was actually a pretty easy fix, and it works way better than it did before. I don't know if this is an efficient way of programming or if this is just the way that you should do it to begin with. But the way I did it before was I took the starting position and added the movement to that, like in the loop. What I'm doing right now is just at the start, begin play, I get starting location, I get the move distance, I add them together to a extra variable move to location, and I just move between starting location and the move to location, and then on the way back I just reverse that, right? So I don't know if adding that one extra variable is considered to be inefficient, or if this is just smart because you're keeping things separated into separate variables. I think this is also, I've done this for a lot of objects lately, making a start like spawning location and then a move to location, and I'm moving between those two locations. Like my entire puzzle in the one-dimensional level for the computer world is based on this principle. And I think this also fixes the issue that I've been having with the side project that I haven't touched in like a month, where things wouldn't move properly. I think that'll be fixed if I do it like this. So maybe during this week, again, sorry for burping, maybe during this week I'll try to implement a system like this in that game, and we'll have a look at that next week. I should also point out that I did add a couple more elements to the two-dimensional level here. How long are we into the video? Only 12 minutes. Well, let's just play through the entire level. Why not? We've got the time. So we've had this, and I'll also be able to show you this way what I said last week about when there's a platform that's moving, but all you see is a black background. You don't really feel that it's moving. And that makes it really difficult to anticipate like when to jump and where you are like in space. Now that we have these particles in the background at multiple different depth levels as well, so you get a lot of parallaxing too, you can feel that your platform that you're on is moving at all times. And that makes the entire platforming so much fucking easier and smoother. These platforms just do not match up. Like, it's fine if they don't always match up, but it seems like they only match up really like half the time. And so far, every single time I've played this level, the first time you get to them, they don't match up. You want them to match up the first time you get to them. So then you have this thing that I made. Is this very much based on like Bowser 3 in Mario 64? that obstacle there? Yeah, it just straight up it is. But I think it works, right? And it also, if you fuck up this jump, it gives you a little bit of a opportunity to save yourself, which is very, very good. Then we've got this little section here with the flipping platforms, which is just fine. Then we got a section where we just can breathe a little, get a save point or a checkpoint rather. Have some of these rotating platforms. I'm probably going to add a little bit more danger to this because it's just relatively boring. Then we get a simple jump again, and then we get some of these falling platforms, which, by the way, those hitboxes obviously are going to get turned off once I'm happy with how they work, which is really right now. So you do need to double jump to make that, and that's a thing that I've been worrying about. Is I kind of need to make all these levels playable without the double jump or the dash, because those are going to be buyable abilities as I see it right now. then again, it's going to be the first ability that you can buy, most likely. And maybe since I'm splitting the, like, this type of level and the actual 3D, like 3D open roaming levels, as I call them, maybe I'll just give you your entire moveset in the 2D levels and only the 3D levels you get to you get to like build and unlock more abilities as you go along. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with that yet, because they're going to start being more and more separate is the thing, to the point where I'm actually thinking maybe the levels that I've made so far, like this level and the one-dimensional level, all that kind of stuff, maybe it's not even going to end up being in the game. Maybe it's just going to be a 3D collectathon instead, of having this halfway point between a full 3D game and this like hallway platformer. Like it kind of feels like having your cake and eating it too, because you can't make up your mind what you want, so you just do both. On the other hand, it could also end up being something like a Mario Odyssey, where sometimes you have these like 2D sections, but a little less smooth in the transition, obviously, where these are just some classic levels within the larger world. And talking about the larger world, I've started making the hub world, which isn't really a hub world. It's more like the main level of the computer world. It took me about 2 hours to make this in Blender, and this is literally just blocking it out. It's actually pretty fucking huge. If we play, you can see how fucking big it is, right? This is the CPU. This is roughly going to be the scale that we play at. Maybe we're going to be a little bit bigger than we are right here, right now. Obviously, all the textures are just like temporary, and all the UVs are massively fucked up because I haven't unwrapped this thing properly. But this is the CPU, so it gives you a bit of a scale as to how fucking enormous this level is going to be. At the moment, it's fairly empty because obviously I'm still modeling it. Those are the RAM sticks, which are going to be a platforming challenge in and of themselves. Those things over there are the I/O. Those are probably going to end up being like buildings or something that you can go into for a little challenge. There's going to be capacitors all around to fill things up a little bit more. We're going to have a platforming challenge here on a little heatsink. We're going to have a graphics card, some like other expansion cards maybe. These are the PCI slots at any rate. So there is that. So there's quite a lot to add in here. And when I started... Also, the hitboxes are, yeah. Hitboxes aren't quite there yet, because they're all just automatically generated hitboxes, which is literally just a box. I need to set them all to a complex collision. But this is literally just... I wanted to see what it would look like to be walking around on the CPU, which, again, it's the CPU that took most of that time. There's a live stream on the channel if you want to go check me... making this thing live, and I wanted to see what this would look like and what kind of scale that we would be platforming at, because I think the next thing that I'm going to make is going to be the RAM stick over here, and that is going to be a bit of a problem if I don't know what scale to like make things at, because it's going to have I'll just show you what I imagine it will be like. Like it's going to have things protruding from it at different different lengths, so that you can platform up it very, very slowly, back and forth. And eventually you'll be able to make your way to the top, which is plenty wide enough to walk on. And then there's going to be like some platforms that take you across to the next one. You platform back and forth a little bit until you get to the top, because there is no way in fucking hell... Okay, other than the hitboxes not being finalized, but otherwise there's no way in fucking hell that you're making this jump, right? At least with the current platforming mechanics, that might change in the future. So then you platform your way across all these 4 different RAM sticks, and at the end you get like a little collectible reward. what else is there to talk about? Not a lot, really, to be honest with you. I imagine that the levels are going to, like the 3 levels that I have for this world, are going to be, first level, the 1D level is going to be here, because this is going to be the power cord. So it's literally ones and zeros, because it's just electricity. Then the 2D level is going to be inside the CPU, which will access through platform up through the heatsink for the cooler, which will be fucking massive as well. And then you get to the top and you can jump into the CPU that way. Doesn't make a lot of sense? No, but it'll work. That'll be the 2D level, because that's where electricity gets like put into actual like strings of data. It's becoming bytes rather. And then you go into the graphics card for the actual like 3D level, because graphics card deals with 3-dimensional graphics calculations and that kind of stuff. So that's my idea for making this world. Once all of this is functional and finished in a playable way, I will be publishing a new test build for people, because once this is finished, and this will be like 2 or 3 months before this is all together at the very least, right? But at that point, I will have more than double the content that I had in the first build. So I think at that point, it'll be good to let people play through it again and maybe see how the new physics work and that kind of stuff. And that also means that I'm going to have to program those new jumping physics. It's going to be very Mario Odyssey-ish. A Hat in Time, maybe, is a bit of a closer example of what I want. I have a pretty good idea of what I want it to look like, because the dash in the overworld is going to not be the dash as I have it right now. I think the dash in general, we're going to do away with this animation. What I want to do is when I dash, I want to disable the model and enable a particle system, which just dashes forward. And then when the dash runs out, you revert back to being the model. Then I also want to have a ground pound like move, which is mostly just there to cancel horizontal movement. Just your horizontal movement, X and Y, becomes 0 instantly and you start traveling downwards. And then you can, with a dash, or a double jump if you have one available still to you, you can cancel out of that one then as well. So it's a way that you can recenter yourself a little bit more mid-air. Or if you are afraid that you're going to overshoot something, you can just immediately just yeet yourself down. And that'll be the same like particle system instead of this weird-ass like rolling animation. So that's an idea that I do have for that. I'm going to have to start programming in like not the mid-air double jump. I don't know if I'm going to keep the mid-air double jump as well, is the thing, right? Because for the normal platforming, like in this regard, where we can like control the camera and stuff like that, I want to have a more traditional like 1 jump, 2nd jump higher, 3rd jump, like double jump, triple jump. If we add on a actual like mid-air jump on top of that, that might be a little too much. But then again, I think at that point the mid-air jump will probably be just a way to like course correct jumps ever so slightly. Do you need that though? When you have that ground pound type move is the question. And I would say yes, because the ground pound type move, which is just a tongue twister in and of itself, is way more extreme. The thing is, if you do a double jump, you can very easily like correct yourself in midair, stop yourself from movement, but then still like wiggle around a little bit to like have fine control over where you're going to land. Where that ground pound move is not really going to have that. It's going to be either you go down and you cancel out of it, but you're not going to have a lot of fine control with it. So I think having a little like mid-air correction jump is still going to be a good thing. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure on it yet, as you can tell. So there's a lot of considerations to be made. There's a lot of programming to be done. There is even fucking more modeling to be done. Holy shit. Again, making this thing as it is right now, this took me 2 hours. The first 45 minutes of which was blocking out where things are going to go. And the rest of it was mostly spent on just making this CPU, which I'm actually relatively happy with, all things considered. When I was modeling it, I really felt like, oh, fuck, this is just not good. This is really fucking bad. But I actually kind of like it, especially if you're up close to it. Obviously, when it has a proper material and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot better. But I quite like it. And eventually there is going to be a CPU cooler on top of this thing as well, which means that you're not going to be able to see half the work I did on this, which is really a fucking shame. But I'm thinking at first the CPU cooler is going to not be on it or something. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to progress from one level into the next. But that is everything that I've done this week. So let's see. A couple of things that I still have to do on my list, which is a thing that I'm adding. I need to remake the player character model. Because at the moment, you can see that there are a lot of separate... you can't actually see it in this level all too well. Also, I can clip through the ground with my camera. I need to fix that. But if you get a right angle, you can see that the legs are actually not connected to the main body. It's got a pretty high poly count, which for the most part is relatively unnecessary, so I can probably lower that specifically on the body. That being said, it does give it a very natural movement. It's going to get different textures. I'm very sorry if you after 3 or 4 months of these devlogs you've gotten and now you can see the legs even better. If you've gotten used to these textures, they're going to change because they're going to be a lot more dynamic because it's going to be a morality system. So it's going to if you lean towards good, it's going to be light blue and white. If you lean towards being evil, it's going to be black and red. So the actual textures are going to be somewhere on that spectrum, like gray and purple, probably for most players, for most of the playthrough. So there's that. And that probably means that some things are going to change somewhat significantly as well. I do kind of want to keep the 3 colors, though, because I think if we have just 2 colors, it'll be too simple. I think the color scheme of this blue with lighter blue and then turquoise is kind of nice. So if we can make that white, blue, and then maybe just a different shade of blue or red, depending on where you go, maybe that'll work. I'll have to experiment a little bit with it. But I need to remake that. And when I remake the entire character, I'm going to have to reanimate things as well. Because at the moment, these are stock animations. And while they work, I kind of want to make my own animations. But that's a pretty terrifying thought to have to do. Because animation, specifically character animation, is very, very difficult to do properly. Start a 3D level for this world as well. Finish the 2D level, obviously. And start in the overworld. And I have done that already. So there's quite a lot of work to be done for the game moving forward, but we do have inspiration and motivation mostly right now, which is something that I've been lacking a little bit over the past month or so. So I'm very happy to be back into the game, right? And I'll be back next week. So I'll see you then.